Okay, welcome back to the channel. It has been a hot minute since I have been on here to do a book review, but I finally finished the Skyward series by Brandon Sanderson, and I wanted to finally do a series review on this channel because most of what I've done has been either individual books or individual books in a series. So wanted to do just an entire series review in one video. I'm joined today by Doomslug, who's gonna help me. She's gonna sit right here. And I didn't have a flight suit, but I do have military BDU pants, so, you know, we're trying. Is this just half of my costume from Halloween from Stargate SG-1? Maybe. But we're not gonna focus on that. We're gonna talk about the books. So, gonna do this a little bit differently. I love you, Doomslug, I'm gonna put you down. So it's gonna be kind of similar to the way that I usually do these, maybe just a little bit different. I'm planning to go by category and kind of talk about my thoughts for the entire series overall, and then I'll give you my individual ratings for each book at the end of that whole discussion. As always though, I'll start spoiler free and then I'll move into spoilers, and in the spoiler section I think I will go book by book overall. Yeah, I think that's the plan. But, you know, let's just go ahead and get right on into it. So, again, because I've discussed this before, but I have all my notes, and it's one of those days where I didn't have time to really, like, solidify all these thoughts in my brain ahead of time, so I'm just gonna read you my summary of the series. So, following the adventures of Spensa Nightshade, a feisty and determined young woman aspiring to become a pilot in the Defiant Defense League, or DDF for short, the Skyward series is a young adult science fiction saga filled with epic space battles, sentient spaceships, and cute space slugs. She had to make another appearance, you know it. It's difficult to give a summary for the series as a whole, as each installment carries its own unique mission that feeds into the overarching plot, but thematically speaking, Skyward is ultimately a tale about how the journey of self-discovery is actually shaped more by the people you love and fight for. Action-packed, fast-paced, the series is delightfully humorous and sneakily heartwarming. So getting into my spoiler-free thoughts, like I said, I'm gonna go ahead and go by category. So usually what I do when I do these book reviews is I talk about my rating for character, plot, writing style, setting and immersion, and pacing. So I'm not going to give you my ratings for each of the books until the end, and I'm not going to really go that detailed into it, but I am going to talk category by category to give you an overall series review. So, first, starting with character. I really ended up enjoying the characters in this series. I struggled with them a little bit at first, and I'll talk about that in a second, but even though the story is told almost predominantly from Spensa's perspective, it is almost all first person, you can feel the foundation of this ensemble cast. And I always love ensemble cast stories, but again, it was just this neat balance between, yes, we're in first person, yes, we are mostly following Spensa, but also you feel the weight and the influence of the rest of the ensemble as you are reading through her eyes and as you get sneaky little tidbits of their chapters here and there. I did struggle with Spensa at first. I wasn't sure what to make of her. I always like Sanderson's protagonists, but in this case, she just felt a little bit exaggerated to me. I kind of wasn't sure what to make of her because she felt so over the top and so kind of, you know, tropey and quirky, and I was like, I'm not sure about you. But then I realized that this was intentional, and a lot of the exaggerated surface of Spensa hints at what's going on deeper down. So as you get to know her and as you get to follow her arc, she ended up becoming one of my favorites, and I absolutely loved her throughout the series as a whole. It just took me a minute to get used to her, but once you do, she is an awesome protagonist. You know, she is, as so many of Sanderson's female protagonists are, relatable, she's complex, she feels human, and she's, you know, just written like an actual character, which I feel like so many YA series really don't necessarily hit the nail on the head with that one. I know that's been a topic of discussion for so long about the strong female protagonist, and especially in young adult novels, and how that's just such a messy, sticky thing to deal with because it's so often done poorly. But Sanderson hits the nail on the head with this every single time, and this was no exception. I did have some complaints about some of the tertiary characters in further books in the series, but considering the series as a whole, that was just kind of a minor blip, and there wasn't necessarily a problem that I had with them. It was just that I didn't really care about them. But again, the ensemble cast, the fact that it is an ensemble cast means there are multiple characters you can care about and that you can feel more invested in versus others, and these ones were just kind of characters that felt like they were just extras to me, and that always kind of bugs me a little bit. But again, considering the series as a whole, it's just a little blip, just a tiny complaint, and that's really only my only complaint about character overall. On the whole, this was a wonderful cast. It's a wonderful narrator. Really ended up enjoying the characters in the series a lot more than I was expecting to, I think. They were really wonderfully executed, and I was really quite attached to them by the end of the series, as you can tell from Doomslug. Doomslug might have been my favorite. I don't know. I love her. Okay, moving on to plot. This was the element of the series that I struggled with the most overall. It took me a while to feel settled in book one. I appreciated what the story was doing, but at the same time I kind of wasn't sure what it was trying to be or what it was trying to do. I was enjoying it, I thought it was interesting, but it took me a minute to really get settled into what was going on and to have that expectation of where the story was supposed to go. Once it took off, it was great. I loved the first book and it was really well done. This led to me feeling a little bit more disappointed in books 2 and 3, just because I felt like the setup of book 1 prepared me for a different series, and books 2 and 3 kind of went a different direction. So I think it was just that my expectations were kind of mislaid, and that might just be more of a me thing as a reader. But yeah, I struggled in books 2 and 3 to really feel like, okay, here's where the story is going. Okay, yeah, I feel like this is what it's supposed to be doing, because it took me so long to get settled into book 1 for it to kind of take a different direction into the series from there. Yeah, I had a hard time being okay with those plot points being the direction the series was going, even though the books were good and I did enjoy them. But book 4, the final book in the series, that really sold me on the series as a whole, because it felt like all the promises that had been made throughout the first 3 books really came to a head in the 4th one. It felt like it was the same mood and feeling of the first book, taking into account everything that happened in the 2nd and 3rd books, and so it was just a really good culmination of everything that the series had promised. And again, I think that episodic kind of style works for YA. I think, you have so many different YA series where you kind of nicely wrap up the first book, and then each book is kind of its own thing, and there's an overarching plot, but you're not necessarily jumping from book to book with this continuous plot. It does feel a little bit more episodic sometimes, and so I can expect that from a YA series. But I think because of the way book 1 was set up, the way the episodes became something different in the subsequent books in the series was just a little disappointing for me, and kind of hard for me to not wrap my head around, but just to accept as a reader that yes, this is where the series is going. So yeah, that was maybe my biggest complaint overall about the series. I did struggle with the plot, but they were still fun. It's a small complaint. Writing style is the next section that I talk about, the next category, and I just love Sanderson as a writer. I love his writing style, and within this universe, I felt like you kind of got to see him play around a bit more as a storyteller, and he does that in his other books as well, but because I'm so used to his more, epic high fantasy kind of style, just watching him have fun with these characters and it be a little bit more playful and juvenile it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed the writing style on this. The humor made me laugh out loud several times, especially with Mbot's character. Mbot was another one who I just loved so much. But yeah, there were so many moments that I was just giggling at. And I think a lot of people don't expect this from me, but I don't viscerally react to what I'm reading very often. So if I tell you a book made me laugh or it made me cry, it did genuinely make me respond, and it's not something I typically do with my books. I'm a bit more stoic as I read. I will feel everything very deeply as I'm reading, but for it actually to make its way out into an expression or a noise doesn't happen very often. So the fact that it made me laugh out loud several times is a credit to his humor and the way that he worked it into the storytelling of this book. And the series as a whole, it was filled with, so much tension and heartbreak, but it was also balanced with so many moments of just sweetness. I loved the overarching message that you are only as good as your team around you. And not that you're not valuable as an individual or that you're not a valuable member of your team, but that a team obviously is made up of multiple people, and how you learn to rely on the strengths of others in the same way that they rely on your strengths, and you count on them to fill in where you're weak. So I just love that overarching theme and idea that was present throughout the whole thing, that he was constantly going back to that idea that Spence's community was so important and they were such a huge part of the story. So I really loved that and appreciated that. And especially because there's such this idea, right, that individuality is so important, and I think especially YA heroines suffer from this, that, she's a one-woman show, she can do it all by herself, she's strong just on her own. So leaning into that idea that yes, Spensa is capable and she's a wonderful character and she's a great female lead, the fact that she still relied on her team and had to learn to rely on her team, and that was a big part of the message. It was just a nice change of pace from a lot of the other YA that I've read in the past. And yeah, again, having read so much of Sanderson's works now, it was fun to just see him kind of play around in the YA genre. I felt like a lot of the writing was a little bit more playful and fun, and you could tell just some of the things that he was including, it just seemed like he was, I've said this word 100 times, but he's just playing, and I really enjoyed that. And it was neat to see the the way that he weaves, you know, his really intellectual, highbrow world building skills into the more straightforward tone of the YA canon, and the way that those just merged together so well. It was just very impressive. So yeah, writing style I absolutely loved. Setting and immersion. This was a mixed bag for me. And I know that setting and immersion and world building is Sanderson's strong suit. It's what he's known for. It's why a lot of people read his works. Maybe not exclusively, but I think that is the selling point for Sanderson a lot of the times, is that he is such a good world builder. His magic systems are so interesting. His worlds are so immersive and unique. But here, I think it just took me a while to really get settled into the world and to feel like I was a part of it. And once I did, I really enjoyed it, but there was just, at the very beginning at least, I felt like there were so many elements going on, I wasn't really sure which one to focus on. It was, okay, are we looking at this element over here, or are we following this element over here, or should I kind of hold them both together and they'll be important at the same time somewhere down the road? So it just took me a minute to really kind of feel like I had a good grounding in this world. But once I did, I thought it was very fun. Not necessarily my favorite of all of Sanderson's books as far as setting goes, but I did enjoy it once I was able to kind of understand the point of what was going on within it. And again, even if it wasn't my favorite setting, it was immersive. Once you kind of understand what's going on, there's no doubt that it's what, like I said, it's what Sanderson's known for. It kind of just like sucks you into the story, and you feel like you can see the world at hand, and you know the rules, and you know what's going on. It just took me a little longer to kind of get settled into this one. And again, this is maybe tied back to character, but just the way that he accomplished his world building through his characters, especially Doomslug and Mbot. They were maybe my favorite characters in the whole series, but just seeing the way that he continued to build the world through the eyes of those characters and through the inclusion of those characters, because, you know, we got Space Slug and Sentient Spaceship. You just kind of see, again, the way that he's playing around with the world building and some of the lightheartedness, and just, you know, it makes you feel like the setting is that much more real through these characters being so significant and them not being your typical human characters. So I really appreciated that as well. Okay, and then lastly, pacing. This was mostly good for me, and I am going to go a little bit book by book on this one. With book one, like I said, it just took a while for me to really understand what the point was. It was fast-paced and I was enjoying myself, but it took me 100 pages or so to feel like, okay, yes, here's the story, here's where we're going with this, because there were so many elements that we were paying attention to that I know he was just planting seeds, but it kind of felt a little confusing for me, because even with the planted seeds, because we were planting them so quickly, I didn't know, like, okay, this plot line, is this the focus? Is this plot line the focus? I thought this plotline was the focus, but now we're back over here. But again, once we hit 100 pages or so, it was like, okay, here we go, and everything kind of starts to weave together. And then it was fine for me, and I thought it really took off, and the pacing was awesome. Books 2 and 3, I really struggled with the pacing. Book 3 more than book 2 for sure. And I think it's because it took me so long in book 1 to feel settled that when we kind of changed directions of the story in book 2, I was just kind of waiting for us to return over here and finish this idea over here. And when it didn't work out that way, I felt like maybe it was just my own misled expectations, but for that reason, the pacing to me felt kind of wonky, because I was just expecting us to come back this way. And so the fast pace moving this way kind of confused me, and I was kind of like, okay, but but yeah, and again, that being said though, as always, book 2, the end of the book was incredible. Everyone knows, or everyone who has read Sanderson knows that when he sticks the landing, it is one of the best things you'll ever read. And he stuck the landing really well in book 2, and that slower, kind of odder pacing, at least for me, ended up really working the way that it wrapped up. Book 3, I really struggled with. It was my least favorite book in the series. That pacing for me was rough. But then book 4 remedied everything that came before. It was, like I said at the beginning, everything I had been hoping for from the series. Kind of felt like all the promises that were set up in book 1 were finally being fulfilled, and all the expansion of the world that happened in books 2 and 3 were coming to a head. So book 4 pacing I thought was incredible. It was kind of, doing that for me the entire series with the pacing, so I was a little all over the board on this one. And again, that's just maybe my taste as a reader, and if we're talking technically, I think Sanderson does such a wonderful job, even in a chapter by chapter basis, balancing those moments of levity with those moments of tension. I never felt in the series like, okay, we've had way too much action, I need to slow down, or okay, it's been moving a little too slow with all of these fluffy moments, I needed to speed up. He was very good about balancing the two of those and kind of working back and forth between them, so that the pacing at the storytelling level seemed to be even and to work really well. He does a really good job of balancing, like I said, those moments of levity that are a little bit slower, a little bit sweeter, where we zoom in a bit, versus the moments where we zoom out and we've got the big plot stuff going on. I'm always impressed by the way he handles that. In this series, he handled it well as well. Okay, so just wrapping up all of those thoughts and giving you my overall ratings. So, book 1, Skyward, got 4.25 stars from me. And then book 2, Starsight, got 4 stars from me. Book 3, Cytonic, got 3.25 stars from me. I think this is maybe the lowest I've ever rated a Sanderson book. I really struggle with it, and I'll talk more about that in my spoiler-filled thoughts. I see why he did it. It's important to the series. It was not my vibe until the last like 40 pages. And then finally, book 4, Defiant, got a whopping 4.5 stars. I thought it was just about perfect. I really loved it. If we're taking all of this on average, the whole series was about, if I'm looking at the actual average, it was 3.5 stars, but I'm rounding that up to a 4 for the entire series. That seems to be a solid rating for how I felt about this as a whole. It's not necessarily my favorite series from Sanderson that I've read, but I did have a really good time once I really got into it, and there was a lot of elements that I appreciated more than I was expecting to, and that was really exciting. And again, I think my expectations were maybe a little high going into this because I've read so much Sanderson. I'm always so impressed. I think the kind of different direction that he took with this and the fact that it's in a different age category than what he usually writes in, I think maybe my expectations were just a little misplaced. So I went into it maybe with some unfair expectations that hampered my reading experience a little bit. But once I was able to look past those and see what the series was for itself, I did end up really enjoying it. It's also my husband's favorite Sanderson series, or so he tells me. So I think from the way he was hyping it up and talking about how excited he was for me to get to this, I was like, okay, this is gonna be the best Sanderson I've ever read. And I was kind of like, yeah, it was fun. I really enjoyed it. I do readily recommend it. I think it is such a well done YA series. Even for the, you know, the more juvenile nature of it, it does handle some really mature themes very well. The fact that the themes are overall about, you know, teamwork and this idea of figuring out who you are in context of your community. I think some of those self-discovery questions were handled really well in these, and I love that he was able to balance that really deep inner searching with those moments of humor and with this, you know, epic space battle storyline going on. It's something I would readily recommend. I think it's a really fun read. I can see a lot of my former students really enjoying this. So overall, it is a very fun series. I did have a really good time with it. Again, my expectations I think were a little skewed going into it, and so it wasn't necessarily my favorite thing that I've read ever, but I did have a lot of fun. Okay, so moving on to my spoiler-filled thoughts. If you do not want spoilers, you can go ahead and click away. I'm gonna go ahead and go book by book. So starting with Skyward. Like I said, I wasn't sure what to make of Skyward at first. I felt like there was just so many elements coming into play. At first it was, okay, she wants to be a fighter pilot, she wants to get into flight school, awesome. Okay, but also we've got this spaceship over here, and maybe that's the point now. And okay, she can't get into flight school. Okay, but yes, she can. So it was just all these different elements, you know, where I was kind of like, what are we doing? Where are we going? I'm not sure. And as much as I love a good, you know, school story, a good training story, I think because so much of the beginning of this was training and school, I kind of wasn't sure, like, okay, what are we working towards? But once we actually got there, you know, awesome. I loved it. I am gonna set this down now. And again, it's funny to me because at this time I have just started writing my own novel. Well, not just started writing. I've just started writing the new draft of my own novel, and that's something that I struggle with myself, is having too many different elements coming into play. And as a writer, I'm kind of like, oh, well, the readers will forgive me. And then as a reader, I was kind of like, okay, but what are we doing? What's the point? Tell me what the point is. So, you know, I'm learning as I'm reading, which is fun. Anyway, once I actually got into the story itself, I absolutely tore through it. I absolutely loved it. I thought Spence's arc was really cool. Again, I really was not sure what to do with her at first because I was like, you're so much. Are we exaggerated on purpose? Are we like trying to be, you know, the stereotypical, like, I'm so tough and I don't need anybody and I can be my own hero and, you know, screw those guys if they don't believe in me. And so I didn't know, and she was so aggressive, I didn't know what to do with her. I was like, oh, I don't want to follow this trope. That bugs me. And then she was humanized, and, you know, you realized it was an act because there were insecurities and she was trying to find herself, and the more that she was humbled, the more of Spence's actual character came out. And just, you know, her exaggeration about drinking the blood of her enemies was just a funny little quirk by the end. So I ended up really loving Spensa, but it just took me a minute to really understand what she was about, because at first I went, ooh, I don't know about you. And also just Mbot. Mbot made me laugh out loud so many times. I loved him. He might be my favorite character of the whole series. I had such a good time with everything in his character. I loved him so much. And the cast as a whole, I just really appreciated. Again, this idea that you've got this, you know, very individualistic, self-propelled heroine who has to consistently see that there's more to people than meets the eye, that her individuality is not the end-all be-all of everything, that there are other people and that they have deeper stories than what she's seeing, in the same way that there's a deeper story to her than what other people see. I really appreciated that back and forth of her trying to prove that she, you know, wasn't a coward like her father, and how dare they look at her that way, while she was, you know, typecasting and stereotyping the people around her and having to realize, oh, there's more to them also. I love that. I think that's such a neat thing to do, especially again in YA when that's not really addressed as often. Like, it is, but at the same time, I think in recent years there's been such a drive for, you know, the strong female character, that she becomes such this individualized character that there's no room for her to be influenced or to learn from the people around her. And so, or she's always right and she has to accept that she's right by herself and she doesn't need any help, and that bothers me. So I liked that Spencer had to go through this journey of, oh wait, no, I need to pause and I need to ask questions before I assume. Loved that. And the fact that, you know, she held both of those in balance. She had a right to be angry, and she was justified in her frustration, and, you know, there was a reason for her rebellion, and that aggressive streak in her had a purpose, but also it was balanced with this constant having to be humbled and learn her lesson and go, oop, sorry, I assumed. It was just a really neat balance in that character arc, and I really appreciated that. I also loved the development of the relationship between her and Jorgen. I think they're so cute. I really loved their relationship throughout the entire series, but just that slow rivals to friends to not even lovers by the end, but the idea that obviously she thinks he's cute, they're attracted to each other, but that they start first at friendship and that need for trust with one another. And again, tying back into that, okay, there's more to him than meets the eye and I need to give him a chance. That arc I just thought was very sweet, and all those little moments that they had together where they surprised one another with the way they behaved was very fun. And I loved Cobb. I loved Cobb so much. I kept, you know, thinking of him as that one character from Starship by Star Kid, the musical. This guy. I'm gonna put him right here. I kept thinking of him the whole time, which, like, I don't know, isn't his character at all, but it was the mustache. It was the description of the mustache. It just made me laugh. I loved it. But yes, again, I love overall just the way this cast influenced Spence's arc and, you know, consistently had to make her put herself into the context of other people and into the context of the world around her to understand herself. It was action-packed, it was funny, it was a great first installment. I had a blast. Moving on to, where is it? Starsight. Oh, Starsight. I liked Starsight. I gave it 4 stars. I thought it was fine. It sounds so like I didn't like it at all. I really enjoyed Starsight. Again, I gave it 4 stars. I thought it was, I don't want to say great. I'm really digging myself into a hole here with this opinion. I liked Starsight once I accepted Starsight for what it was. I think because I took so long to get settled into the world in book 1 and then ended up getting so attached to those characters and that mission, for Starsight to immediately be like, by the way, Spence is going on a solo mission, you're not going to see your friends for almost the entire rest of the book. I didn't want to accept that. I didn't want her to be by herself. I was like, but wait, everybody else, what about them? And so I spent almost the entire book just waiting for her to get home and for her to finish her little spy mission. And by the halfway point when I realized that that's not what this book was, and like we just weren't going to go home, or if we did, it was going to take almost the entire book and she was going to be on Starsight the whole time, then I was like, okay, let me, you know, rewire what I'm thinking about this, because my expectation was for her to be with her friends, and so her going off by herself, I wasn't ready to accept yet, and I had a hard time with that. And I think her finding her crew and her team on Starsight felt a little repetitive to me. It kind of felt like, okay, copy paste from book 1. Spencer finds a team, yay. Yeah, I said it kind of just felt like take it from the top, but in a new setting now. But that said, Spencer having to learn the lesson of empathizing with her enemy and realizing that they're not actually her enemy, that there are other people here, that they don't all mean her harm, that they're not all just snakes, you know, who are out to get her. I loved the part where, I don't even remember her name, but the housekeeper who just like keeps wanting to make her food, and Spencer's like, she's spying, she's gonna poison me, it's awful. And that moment of realization where she's like, oh no, she's just like this sweet old housekeeper who thinks I'm not eating and wants to make sure I eat, and she's got this very maternal instinct. I thought that was such a sweet moment. And her having to make friends with her enemy, I thought that was a really important lesson. And again, it ties back into this idea that there's more than meets the eye. that overarching theme throughout the whole series. So I did really appreciate it. And that last 100 pages or so, all those political twists, banger. I loved that. It was so cool seeing all those pieces fall into place. It took me a while, again, to really accept Starsight for what it was, but once I was able to look past the, okay, I wanted to be over here on Detritus, but we've moved and we're just going to be over here for a while. Once I accepted that, I thought it was an excellent book. Again, I had my little gripes here and there, and it wasn't my favorite in comparison to the first book, but it was really good, and I did like that we were expanding the world little by little in that way, and doing it thematically, where we weren't just, you know, going off into the universe and discovering all these different things. We were doing that, but in the context of Spensa still having to learn that there's more to people than meets the eye. Okay, moving on to Cytonic. Oh, Cytonic. I struggle with this one so much. This was, again, the lowest rated book in the series for me, 3.25 stars, and the lowest I've ever rated a Sanderson book, and I will tell you why. I was just waiting for Spensa to get back home, and so the fact that there was an entire other book where Spensa did not go home until the very last second, I didn't want it. I wanted her to be with her people again. I was ready for her homecoming, and that little tease at the end of book 2 to be like, she's home, no she's not. Oh, and now she's gonna go off into the nowhere and spend the entire book there. I really struggled with that. I had a really hard time with it. It was just super annoying to me as a reader, because again, my expectations were maybe misplaced, but that's what I wanted. I wanted her to go home, and I thought we were setting up for that, for her to take everything she'd learned and to return to her people. And so for that to be delayed again by an entire other book, I didn't want to deal with it, but I had to. I compared it to that episode of Stranger Things season 2, I think it's episode 7, where Eleven goes off by herself and like learns more about her past and her powers. I know everyone hated that episode. I didn't hate it. I didn't love it. I understood its purpose and why it was there, but I remember my gripe and my complaint with that episode being, hey, we kind of shoved this in the middle of the main plot, and so it felt really disjointed from everything else, and the pacing got all messed up because of that, in my opinion. I would have appreciated that storyline more if it was broken up into like 2 and kind of tacked on to everything else going on in the other episodes. And I understand, I think they probably did it for suspense, and there was a lot of important stuff that happened in that episode. I do stand by that was important for Eleven's arc, but it was like the exact same thing. Let me go off and discover these things about myself. Okay, I have to go home to my friends now. This is important. It was the exact same message, and it was the same annoying, like, but the rest of the story, what's happening? I want to know what's going on. I want you to go back here. And that's how I felt this entire book. Was just, okay, now go home. Okay, but go home now. Okay, but That said, there were some things I did appreciate about the book. I didn't hate the entire thing. The reveal that Doomslug was her reality icon, I loved that. I don't know what it was about that moment that I was just like, oh, Doomslug's here. Oh my goodness. And I, was giggling at the fact that the reality ashes that were so important were just, slug poop. Like, it was just cute. It was funny. And that was such a sweet little reunion and that little taste of home, because she thought she had sent her home. I loved that moment. That was very sweet. The reveal at the end with Chet being a Delver the entire time was awesome. That was such a neat twist, and the way he set that up, that was really cool. I really thought that was well done, and I appreciated that so much. I thought that was such a neat expansion of the world, but also just this like, oh, it was in plain sight the whole time, and then you see it and you go, oh, that makes so much sense. And that was a really neat reveal. I did really love that about this book. Because there was so much, again, where I was like, okay, cool, this guy Chet, why is he here? What are we doing? And even the reveal that he was, Captain Spears, I was still like, okay, I guess, what's the point of you? I'm not really sure, again, why you're here, what we're doing. But when that reveal happened, it was like, oh, that's so neat. So I did appreciate that. I didn't care for the Broadsiders arc. Again, it just felt like the exact same thing that we did in the last 2 books. Spensa, here's your team, train them, learn to work with them. There's more to them than meets the eye. Again, I love that theme and I think it's so well done here, but I didn't feel like this was the place that we needed it, and it felt like rinse, repeat, let's do it again. And so that entire arc, I was kind of just like, let's be done with it. And that was a lot of the book, so that's not great. I will say I did love the ethereal, eerie nature of the nowhere. I do love settings that make you feel like really tiny in the cosmos, this feeling of there's so much more in the universe that we don't understand, that it's beyond our understanding, and just like that sense of awe that you feel about the nowhere. I did really appreciate that about the setting. I thought that was really cool. Also, I did really love Spensa and Jorgen's relationship development here as well. All their little dream interactions were so cute, and I love that there were those little tastes of home throughout, that you understood Jorgen was looking for her and still looking after her and coming into his own cytonic powers, and just their interactions kind of in that weird dream dream space while she was gone and he was dealing with everything on detritus. I loved those moments. I think that was one of my favorite parts of this book for sure. But yeah, up until the last like 40 pages, I was kind of just like, where are we going with this? Are we done yet? When are we going home? And again, that last 40 pages was awesome. It was epic, but it took me until that much. Let me find the last 40 pages. It took me until about here-ish in the book that I finally said, I care about what's happening. All this, I didn't really care what was happening. So that sounds like such a harsh review, even for a 3.25 star rating. It sounds like I hated this book. I didn't hate it. There was a lot about it that I appreciated. I just really struggled with most of it. Definitely my least favorite in the series. I'm sorry, Spencer. I love you. But finally, Defiant! What a banger. This was so good. Again, it was everything I had been hoping for the entire series. We were back home. There was epic space battles. All these character arcs were coming to fruition. I loved this. I thought it was great. And I worried that I was giving it too high of a rating because is it the best thing I've ever read? Not necessarily. But thinking back to other 4.5 stars reads that I've had this year, this absolutely is on par with that. So Defiant was awesome. So good. I felt for poor Spencer so much in this book. Just like her confusion over who and what she was. The fact that she felt like she didn't belong anymore after struggling so long to make those connections and to feel like she belonged. That sense of disconnect from her friends of I don't fit here anymore and where is my home now and who am I supposed to be now? That disconnect that she felt, oh, I felt for her so much. And I think that made me appreciate retroactively Cytonic even more than I did initially, just because so much of that book was her coming to terms with who she was and what she was and her powers, but then having to relearn that in the context of the community she fought to establish and feeling like it doesn't work anymore and having to come into her own again in that way. It was so good. And her having to deal with the consequences of her actions and the fact that they hurt people, that she believed she was doing the right thing, but she was hurting the people she loved in the process. And that kind of like back and forth of, I think this is what I need to do, but maybe I shouldn't because of this argument I had over here. And she doesn't want to isolate the people she loves, but she needs to be able to do this thing to save her people and her planet. Like just all that stickiness of what she was supposed to do. Like again, Spencer was a complex character throughout the series, but her complexity really shone through in this book. And I loved the arc that she had. All the murdering of the slugs! I was tilted. I was so upset. I genuinely almost cried over that calm slug, that sweet calm slug when she was murdered. It was so awful. And I loved all the little sluggies. I wanted them to be okay. Oh, and the twist of Spencer being kidnapped after she had just run off by herself to do her solo mission so that it absolutely looks like she just run off again and wasn't kidnapped. Only for her friends to come rescue her because they recognized she made a promise and they trusted her. Beautiful. I loved that. Again, this idea of your community being the most important thing, of being such an enormous piece of you, that trust that she was sharing between not just herself and Jorgen, but herself and her friends and her commanders and her family. That was such a good moment. I wanted to cheer when detritus appeared in front of the, what was it called? The station where she was being kept. I just read these. I should know this. I also thought Braid was a really cool villain. The fact that her entire motivation was like, I have to prove that I am the monster they say I am, otherwise what was the point of all this? She was a delightfully morally sticky character that you could not predict, and I sympathized for her. I don't know if I empathized. I sympathized, but like you understand where she's coming from and the grander evil that's at play, but the fact that she leans into that and lets the story that she's been told about her ancestors, about her humanity being aggressive and evil, and her just leaning into it saying, okay, you want me to be a monster? I'll be a monster, and just full set and going for it. She was a really interesting villain. I liked her a lot. I wasn't sure about the Delvers changing sides. It felt a little easy for me, but at the same time it worked thematically, and I loved that Mbot had a hand in it, that it was his realization of his character of kind of being sneaky and being a spy amongst them and being the one to nudge them towards change that they've been, fighting against the entire book. Not even the entire book, the entire series. I appreciated that about Mbot's character arc. So even though that felt a little like, okay, the Delver switched sides, cool, felt a little bit easy, everything that meant in the scope of everything and the way it kind of pulled all these pieces together, I did really appreciate and like that. Again, I loved Spencer and Jorgen in this book. I really just loved them overall. The fact that their conflict and the development of their relationship felt like a real couple. It wasn't, this fabricated drama. It wasn't, these obnoxious miscommunications. It was the fact that these two people who love each other very much with their conflicting idealism. The fact that they each care about the same thing but are trying to go about it in different ways, and they care about each other. That felt like this very natural conflict, and the way that they dealt with that and the way they humbled themselves to take care of each other and learn to grow for one another, it just felt very organic. And again, like an actual couple would deal with problems. And so I really appreciated that about their character arc, their relationship arc in this book, that it felt real and not forced, that the conflict happening wasn't this, you know, we made it up so that there was drama. It was, hey, here are two very real people dealing with this very real problem, and, you know, they're fighting for the same thing, but their ideologies are clashing against each other. So how do they, in love, work together through that? That was neat. I loved that. And again, Doomslug is just my best girl. I loved her. She was probably, maybe, my favorite character in the whole series. I don't know, I really love Mbot too. The two of them are tight. Just look at her. How can you not love this face? Look at that little darling. Anyway, you're gonna stay here with me for now. It was a bit of a fast ending, but I loved that final moment was Spensa checking in with her old flight. It just felt like everything came full circle. This moment that we began with, we ended with, and I loved that full circle feeling in that moment. I thought that was very well done as well. Overall, that's pretty much all my thoughts. I've been rambling for a really long time now. I really did enjoy this series on the whole, and I readily recommend it to anybody who is looking for something a bit more lighthearted and fun. Again, there are some heavier topics in here, but it is never so heavy that you walk away from the story feeling heavy. I think that is something I appreciated about it on the whole, is that I walked away from the story feeling lighter. I felt that sense of reminder of how much I love my friends and my family and the people in my life, and how much they have shaped me, and how my own individuality, you know, is not in a vacuum, that it is often shaped by the people around me, the most shaped by people around me. And just being able to appreciate that sense, it made me appreciate laughter and friendship and fun space battles and cool space slugs. It was just a fun time, so I do recommend it if that sounds like your cup of tea. Again, a lot of the elements in this were really surprising, and I really enjoyed them a lot more than I was expecting to, and I am really glad to finally have this series from Sanderson under my belt. Sorry, Doomslug. Just slapped her in the face. That's pretty much it. I am just now starting his Dark Materials, which I have never read because I was raised Christian. I'm still Christian, but, you know, raised in the Christian community that was like, those books are evil. I don't think they are so far. I'm glad I'm finally reading them. Can't say too much to that yet because I'm only about halfway through the first book right now, but it's really good so far. Really interesting. So excited to talk about those at some point as well. But until then, I think that this is it for now. I will have another writing update at the end of the month. As always, feel free to follow me on my other platforms. You can follow me on Goodreads and on Instagram, and I will have those linked below. But in the meantime, thank you as always for tuning in and listening to me talk for way too long. I expected this to be a little longer because I was doing an entire series review, but yeah, this one might be a bit much, so I apologize. But anyway, appreciate you spending your time listening to me ramble. Excited to talk more books with you soon. Say bye, Doomslug. Goodbye. That's so lame. Anyway, I'm done.